Welcome to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. Please take a minute, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and more importantly than any of that, share the conversation, remind folks that we're having this conversation. I know that 9 a.m. on a Sunday is not, there's no typical time for this channel. We do them all kinds of random times, but maybe a little early for some folks. So wake them up and let them know that we're having this conversation. And if they miss it, then, send it to them afterwards. It'll be here for folks to watch. I'm very much excited to have this conversation. Hopefully this will be one of maybe a few where we dig into some more nuts and bolts of what we're going to be talking about today. Very pleased and honored always to have Kali Akuno with us. As folks know, I don't have his bio with me right now, of course, but he is the director of Cooperation Jackson, founder. He also, hang on, I got it. He's a co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson. He is the director of special projects and external funding in he was the director of special projects and external funding in the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi. His focus in this role was supporting cooperative development, the introduction of eco-friendly and carbon reduction methods of operation, and the promotion of human rights and international relations for the city. Akuno has served as the co-director of the U.S. Human Rights Network and the executive director of the People's Hurricane Relief Fund, based in New Orleans after Katrina. He was a co-founder of the School of Social Justice and Community Development, a public school serving academic needs of low-income African American and Latino communities in Oakland, California. Without further ado, welcome Kali to the show. Thank you for joining us again today, and it's good to be with you. I know we pulled this together on short notice, but always a pleasure to have you.
Good back, comrade.
All right.
Good to be back. So, let's get into it.
Yeah. So, I told you beforehand, the first reflection I had was that a couple years ago, probably about 3 years ago now, you wrote a piece and then you did a little bit of talk, one with Feroz Manji and some other folks. And, basically you said by hook or by crook, we would be right where we are right now, including not just Donald Trump retaking the White House, but also having control of the Supreme Court, having control, most likely, I don't know if it's finalized now, but it seems like he's going to have, he definitely has the Senate. The House and the Senate. Yeah. And so, in a position to be able to actualize his agenda, the agenda of, Project 2025 and the other agendas that the right wing have in this moment. And so you were able to see that on the horizon. And I know that you don't take any pleasure in, being right about that. But you also had a prescription that you laid out in terms of what we needed to start doing to prepare for it, which, maybe some people have taken seriously, but I know that it hasn't, we haven't done the type of work that we need to do. And so, I wanted to just start this conversation of, well, better late than never, or, we're here now, and where do we go from here? And so go ahead, just start us off and we can have a discussion about this.
Yeah. Where to begin? So I think we need to, number one, be honest that the type of preparation that was required did not happen. Then that doesn't mean that, some folks here or there, that I know or you may know or others in the audience, haven't gotten trained, haven't been doing mutual aid, haven't been doing, trying to build some institutions, food production, some of the things that were mentioned in that last piece. Now, I know that have been going on. They've been going on before that warning, just a lot of comrades with particular political orientations have been doing that. But the piece I'm speaking to was that the organizing within our communities were to have a political resonance. and for folks to understand the broad necessity of like why food sovereignty is necessary, why local food production is necessary, why people need to be engaged in it, why people need to convert their front yards, their backyards, things on top of your roof if you live in New York or someplace like that. That didn't really happen. There was time and opportunity, but it didn't happen. And so one of our first tasks is to we need to break this in phases. Let me say that off the top as well. We need to break some of our response in phases. So as of now, we got 2 months, a legitimate 2 months before the actual official reigns, get passed over to Donald Trump and to the Congress. They're already sitting in the Supreme Court. So you got 2 months to gear up, start making some connections, start building some kind of alliances. We got 2 months for the initial kind of preparation that needs to happen. And a couple of things I think, in addition to all of the points around self-defense, mutual aid, low scale kind of autonomous production, all those things people need to be engaged in right now, right? And start trying to map that out. But the most important and critical thing is starting to get ourselves prepared for the repression that is going to come. And that will probably come in some waves, if we listen to what they said and take them seriously, which I do, and which I've been encouraging folks to take them seriously, about what their plans are and how they're going to execute them. We need to gear up as much legally as we possibly can, with some understanding that the law is not going to protect us. You're just kind of trying to use that as a shield, ultimately to like buy some time and to make a certain set of moves, that whatever democratic space exists, and that's going to change over time. Let me state that, let me back up a little bit, because I think there's a particular orientation that I think folks have to have, to kind of cast away some illusions, because that's going to be important, to just be very clear about what the enemy is going to do, what they are prepared to do, and how some aspects of what they will do. So I want folks, number one, to understand Trump has a mandate. He has a mandate. Now, he barely won more votes than he got the last time, but he won the majority. He won the popular vote. He won the House and the Senate. So they have a mandate, from this society, and how it plays the game of constructing social power, social and political power. They have a mandate, and they are going to use it. Understand that. Within that mandate, I would say this is point number 2. Do not anticipate or plan on there being another kind of real election cycle. Like, folks need to jettison that. And I'm already hearing, all the liberal pundits around what the Democrats need to do, or what a third party needs to do, or how we need to get it organized to win the next election, or be better prepared. And you're making assumptions without listening to what some of these folks have actually said, who are now in the positions to execute it, that there will continue to be some semblance of the bourgeois order as we understand it, right? And we have experienced it for, all of our lives to this point, those of us here in the United States anyway. There, again, I hope I prove to a degree to be wrong. But basically, Trump and his team have said that they were going to shred the Constitution, and many times in various different ways. The folks in the House have said pretty much the same thing. The Senate has been a little bit more tight-lipped, the members there. And the Supreme Court has made it clear, they're going to interpret the Constitution in a way that is going to affect basically minority rule, white minority rule, for the future. So they may still make some reference to that as a body, that gives them some legitimacy. But like the Bible, that has a million interpretations. They're going to interpret the way they want to interpret it, and they're going to execute power in the way that they see fit to maintain control and build the social order that they want. And I'm saying this because I think there's a way in which people will kind of reserve energy towards, regrouping and coming up with new narratives to try to win back some of the black men or the Latino men or some of the white women who voted, for Trump, with the aim and intent on kind of winning them to some new coalition. That's going to be fundamentally a waste of time. Because you're still presuming that there's going to be some electoral piece. If anything, you need to be convincing them, because we got to engage with folks who voted for Kamala and Donald Trump. We're not going to have a choice. We're not, we don't live in an isolated pool within this country. So, I think that the piece is really trying to, like, for some of the Trump voters, particularly some of the working class folks, we are going to definitely need to be able to point out the contradictions of what they're planning on executing and how it's not going to change their social positioning. It's not going to improve their livelihoods. And trust me, most of particularly the economic plans that he and his team are talking about, tariffs, and that's going to make inflation worse. If they do, deportations, it's going to change, mass deportations in the way they're talking about, and I think they will. That's going to change economic conditions. That's going to also make the price of particularly food items worse. It's going to make certain supply chains collapse. So if you thought some of the supply shortages were bad in 2021 and 2022, that's going to become acutely worse. If there aren't, this super exploitable wage, labor to exploit in the fields and the slaughterhouses and, the packing houses, that's going to make it worse because there is no immediate replacement for those workforces. If primarily just because under the conditions, most folks who have citizenship or papers, are going to try to work for for higher wages and better working conditions, and are not compelled by economic force and social force to have to kind of take what they could get. So, you should also expect that they are going to do everything within their power to change that, to force certain populations in certain places to go back and work in the fields. I know that there was some email circulating in Mississippi, Texas, and I'm sure some other places, by some fascists who were telling, some people thought it was a hoax, but saying, black people better be prepared to, go back to slavery to fulfill some of these, labor tasks. So it's not like they aren't thinking. Some of their strategic forces aren't thinking about some of these issues, and we need to register that some of the experiments that they've already done within this last 4-year period have already indicated they're going to have to shift towards some new kind of labor force. And that particularly is true, like in Florida, with some of the, backwards ass laws that DeSantis and them put in place, which led to a massive exodus of folks, trying to flee the repression. Some aspects of the Florida agricultural economy sector, have been very tight, crashed. They've kind of made up for it in different ways, but they had enough time now to know, in terms of like some of the deep planning, what types of new social conditions are going to be necessary for the economy still to function. And so part of their repression going forward is going to create new conditions wherein, there's going to be more prisoners, and the prisoners are going to be, forced to engage in hard labor and agricultural labor, will be leased out on probably scales we haven't seen since the early 20th century. So I'm saying all of this by just and trying to cite some examples, because I think there is a hard reality that we have yet to really kind of confront. I know people have been, scared in certain senses, but I think beyond the fear, in this period, we need to analyze, where are they going to try to make some motion? And you do that not to like be in bad prediction, but be prepared on what terrain that you are going to be able to fight back on and how you might fight back successfully, right? What type of forces and allies we need to work with to get prepared to fight back, because a lot of the things that I'm citing, the forces of reaction that voted for Trump, they're going to actually be in points of tension with each other around some of the execution, right? Because, just because they got these 74, 75 million votes, or Trump did, that doesn't mean that every single person is in agreement and signed up with every single thing within that agenda, right? Politics never, in our system here within this empire, never works out that way, right? So, and again, citing the case in Florida, where on an ideological level, you had a bunch of petty, bourgeois, some elements of the ruling class that for political reasons were for mass deportations. But then there was some who kind of clearly recognized, I'm with you on that, on a cultural and ideological level, but you actually hurt in my pocket, because I depend on that, exploiting that labor to make ends meet, for my business. So they're going to run into some major contradictions, and we need to figure out how to put a wedge in those contradictions. That is where like the broad kind of organizing that I'm talking about needs to happen for us to be able to do that. But we got 2 months to put ourselves in position, to kind of do a level of fortification. And again, I'm just repeat, do a level of fortification, figure out who's prepared to do what. That's why these conversations need to be had. And if we are going to have a conversation with liberals, I'm gonna argue quite sternly, comrades, that we need to do some lines of demarcation, which is why I was going back to like, let's be clear that there may not be another election. Because if they want to engage, somebody's going to try to engage me like, well, this is what we need to do to talk to these white working class folks. But like, I want to talk to white working class folks, but I'm not gonna have no conversation with them about joining the Democratic Party, or my first conversation is not going to be them joining some alternative party. It's going to have a real conversation. Things is going to get rough for you too, and you can either go kind of one of two or three different ways. You can support the repression of me and mine, which in the long run ain't going to help you. Might make you feel a little bit better, but it ain't actually going to help you, right? Or you can start getting down in a program where we are starting to a level of production and community building with each other for the hard times that are going to come. Now, which one do you want to choose to do? Now, they're going to have to be convinced hard times are coming. And that's going to be hard, because I think most folks think that they read what happened on November 6th with the stock market and Bitcoin and think that, okay, good times are coming. We're going to have to provide them with a sound economic, analysis of how the capitalist system actually works. And the stock markets and, what they say, the Wall Street and Main Street don't operate the same. They've been long disconnected, and we have to explain that to folks. So folks, concretely get it. Like, the stock market can do great. It was doing great under Biden, right? I mean, he was out there trying to make economic arguments like, look, the stock market is booming. There's more jobs, but they were all low wage jobs that some people had 2 or 3 of, and they didn't want to engage in a real conversation about like, no, man, I know the price of gas is more than it was 4 years ago. I know the price of bread is more than it was 4 years, and eggs are like, they used to be $2 and now they $8, $9. I know that. You can't lie to me and tell me, that I haven't been feeling it. We best not do that. And have a clear conversation with folks about it's about to get rough and we need to be prepared to engage. And you start being engaged, if we understand that there's going to be supply line disruptions, us trying to do a certain level of local food production ain't got nothing to do with, on a practical level about just being, more socially responsible or whatever. It's like, no, at this point, we are actually doing this because there's going to be a need and necessity to be able to take care of our own caloric needs and to be able to engage in community without folks having to be cutthroat with each other, because there's not enough food or there's not enough resources to go around. Right. So, the part that I want our folks to think, like trying to engage folks is, if things really get to a catastrophic level, you're going to be easy to have social order if you can sit down and broker with folks with food, than folks having to think, I got to come in your house and steal your canned goods. Two totally different realities. And which one do we want to confront? I think I want to confront, like, hey, there's some food for us to eat. Help me, do some more planting. Help me do some more cultivation of it, and then we won't have to be in this bunker kind of mentality. And I want to say that comrades, like, when I say get prepared, and stock up, I mean that. I seriously mean that. But I don't want folks to think that this is a call to, like, become some serious, deep, isolated, isolationist survival prep. That ain't gonna help. At the end of the day, it's not going to protect you, right? Because we got to remember, the fascists got far more guns. They got far more things stored up. They got far more networks to rely upon. We don't. So you do that as an element of individual preparation. But if you're not doing that in concert with other people who are doing, sharing resources, learning some new skills on how to, produce, distribute, do medical supply, medical relief, tend to wounds, minor illnesses, sickness, keep cuts clean, like all these different things. If you're not doing that for a broad social reason, I would argue that you're doing it wrong. You're kind of doing it for the wrong reason. We're not going to win that way. Right? That's not the orientation. So please don't read anything I say, like, you go down and do a bunker. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. Right. You got to do the individual work, but then the part of that individual work is building a collective, organizing with other folks and getting them to move in this direction. So then it becomes an aggregate, and then a level of power that you can operate from within your own local community to do some organizing and let folks know we can provide sanctuary. We can do these things, and there's a reason why you should join us, both for political, but also material reasons when times get tough. And it's better to have an argument that accomplishes both than one that just join me for political reasons. If folks that don't know in times of crisis how certain material needs are going to get met, they may agree with you politically, but they're going to have to forge to find what they need. We don't want that, right? That winds up becoming a distraction. Now we need to be mindful, and I'm putting it in real terms as best I can. And also, speaking in some code, so y'all got to bear with me and try to read some things, underneath what I'm saying, just to be clear and make that explicit. But don't think, we do some of these things. I'm encouraging folks to do some of these things, because I think they're necessary. But don't think that any of this thing is a guarantee for safety, right? Organizing people in the millions is our only guarantee, not only to assure a degree of safety, but to be able to win. And the aim here, I would argue, comrades, even we're going to be on our heels and on the defensive for this next period. There's no question about that. But the aim and objective is still to win. And that is still possible. Let me say that so folks, don't think that they're, I'm speaking doom and gloom, not where I'm at. Because I would argue to a certain extent, this is a major fucking opportunity we got. Because what it speaks to is just the level of uncertainty that the actual system is in, that folks feel that they have to make desperate choices to meet a desperate situation. And fascism, the choice around that is always about folks wanting order in what they feel is chaos. Right? Remember that. Folks wanting order in what they feel is chaos. And so we've been told, or we're following this politically, there's a lot of folks feel that there's random chaos out there, right? And they've chosen some forces that think there's going to come with, a hard hammer and a stick to repress the different forces they think are stealing from them or undercutting them or in competition with them. Like, that's their rationality. But it speaks to they are not secure enough in how the actual functioning of the capitalist economy works and operates to be able to extract in the normal way. That means to a certain extent, they have these plans, and 2025 should be taken absolutely serious. but it's just a revanchist plan. It's just a plan of oppression, and like you can squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, but that doesn't enable a capitalist dynamic of growth, right? It doesn't lend itself to that. So the folks who squeeze, they're going to eventually, my point is, more of them going to find themselves being squeezed by the very hammer that they think that, and the glove that they think that they put in place to kind of correct the situation. And so within that, there's a lot of opportunity, right? Because they got answers that ain't going to answer pretty soon. And that base is going to be dissatisfied and then be looking for answers elsewhere. And we're going to have to survive, but also, to be able to provide some answers and an example. But we also need to have some practical things on the ground that illustrate that there's another way that this could be done. So that's another part around, a level of visible organization, and politicization of our work in this particular context. And let me be clear about part of what I'm saying, because, I think there's some realities that we going to have to contend with on a geographic level, and let me be clear, most of what I'm talking about being executed is going to have to happen in urban and suburban environments, at least off the top. Because that is where, to the extent the democratic apparatus, and the forces, the social forces that are tied to provide a little bit of a shield, it's in those environments that shield somewhat exists, right? Because of the population concentrations and the densities and the political orientations of most folks who kind of live in cities and in suburban environments. So that's where there'll be some room, at least I would say this first 2 months, and then the first, the phases I was talking about, because I moved on, but the phase I'm talking about, we got a 2-month window. Then after that, there's the first 100 days. Then after that, there's a year. Then after that, I think you're talking about a 2-year cycle. And why am I breaking some things down now? Just to go back, right? You got 2 months before they are, the office is transitioned. That's what I'm talking about, 2 months, right before Trump is inaugurated and the Congress comes in. That's the preparation time that we have now, a little bit more than 2 months. Then there's the period of the first 100 days where they're going to try to roll out harder than what they did in 2016. And I want folks to go back and study and remember what happened in 2016, right? Like one of the things that he jumped out with the gate was the Muslim ban. And we had a decent amount of protest for that, a decent amount of protest for his inauguration. We're going to need to do a broad collective assessment in this first 2 months. Do we have the confidence, the courage, and the organizing capacity to mobilize enough people to make a counter impact and to create enough pressure and space with protests all throughout the empire? Don't just need to be in DC. I would argue that would need to be a mistake. That would be a mistake to just try to rally all the forces there. We don't need to be some concentrated there, but we know there needs to be hardcore, demonstrations in Austin, in Tallahassee, in Jackson, in Baton Rouge, like a lot of the capital cities or places where, that aren't just the political capitals, but the actual concentrations of capital in various states. So like New York or Boston or some of the places like that, San Francisco, Los Angeles, some things like that would need to be kind of a massive level, coordinated. And I think there needs to be some coherency to the demands, but things that will also need to have some local variance, because the piece that we're not going to have time to get into today, they also want a lot on a local level in places like New York and California, right, where normally they don't gain ground, or normally democratic strongholds. California's always been a little bit mixed. I mean, that's what gave us Reagan. So, but yeah, so that needs to happen, and we need to do some serious assessment. I know there's all kind of calls from, all these different forces, to kind of let's analyze what happened, some elements of what is to be done later. I want to try to interject and say some of this call needs to be, some of these calls need to make real clear assessment. What are people's appetites, at least right now, You might want to do a temperature check in a month, and then a temperature check maybe 2 weeks out of folks that you're in contact with to see what the appetite is. And we need to kind of know that to understand, what organizing terrain amongst the organized forces, our bases, are we actually operating within? Because I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure there is a real appetite to do mass protests for a couple of different reasons. I think the Democrats did a damn good job of punishing, the student intifada and curtailing its kind of growth. I think it was, the movement has done a good job of staying engaged and staying out there for over a year. I don't know if it's mine or yours. It's getting a little weak.
Yeah, I think it's on your end, but I think it's it seems to stabilize a little bit now.
Okay. But they effectively demobilized folks, and to the extent that people, some of this motion is going to be tied to their mobilization machines. I don't think they really have an appetite. The Democrats don't have an appetite to really push back. And part of the reason I would argue they don't have an appetite is because they clearly made a choice that protecting Israel was more important than winning this election. And if they try to go into a mass mobilization, they're gonna have to deal with one of the most stern corners that is the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and I don't think they really want to engage that. So I don't know if there's going to be people out there thinking there's going to be some mass protest. If it relies on their apparatuses and the institutions that they move forces with, through the nonprofit sector, so social movement sector, I don't think there's going to be much of an appetite for that, right? And then I think the other thing is, but why we need to do the temperature check, we go back to that. We need to know how scared people are, right? And to what degree do they want to put themselves, out there to become targets? Because I think folks are very clear that the state apparatus under, is that mine going out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, folks in the chat, let me know if it's seems to be more Kali's end or if my video is more stable. I think it's your end, but I know that's the conditions we're working with right now.
Let me try to do something real quick.
Okay.
All
right. Yeah, they think it's you.
I'm finna switch over to another in a quick second.
Okay.
I'm gonna switch over to another internet source, so I think that one may be more stable. Luckily, I brought this with me. So apologies, comrade. Let me switch over.
They do say that they can hear you all right, so we'll work with it. But yeah,
they can hear me all right. But, okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, so going back, like point I was making earlier, I'll come back to now. We need to make some clear kind of lines of demarcation, I think, with the liberals. And this is where kind of casting away certain illusions, I think, is very important. Because to the extent that they're going to try to make some calls of, everybody unite and fight, we're going to have to like really push on them and make some conditions to whatever degree there's going to be coalition that they're going to work with. And the first one, y'all could imagine off the top, I think is like, okay, y'all going to have to actually take a serious position on ending the carnage, ending the genocide. That is the first line of serious demarcation, I would stress. And I don't think we should back away on that, because what we need to distinguish and what we need to be clear on, which is already happening, the liberals are prepared to throw us under the bus. That's another reason why you better not have no illusions, right? And you could already see from Kamala and Biden we're going to execute a peaceful transfer of power and all. If you're going to do that, then why was y'all out there at the last minute calling them fascists? Right? So either you think that they're fascists or you were playing with us. Which one is it? And we now need to be clear. Rather than having a conversation, we now need to be clear and set the terms of, either you're going to get down in this particular way, or, at best, we can only have tactical engagement with you. And we're going to keep a stern eye on you because you're going to start making compromises well ahead of time. We need to get prepared for that in the 2 months and watch it. I think Ben Maskey brought up to me kind of what happened. I think it was in Wisconsin, some years ago when Scott Walker, came in. The Democratic forces basically started implementing the laws that he wanted while they were still in power, right? And how, I want folks to think about what I mean. So just how confident the bourgeois order is in their partisanship and their ability to compromise. What do I mean by that? Supreme Court basically just constructed a dictatorship. I hope folks understand that with their, at least the ability for there to be a dictatorship under the guise of the presidency. I would argue it's always been that to a degree, but there was just kind of these old gentlemen's agreement that you would rotate power because they had enough consensus on maintaining, the empire, with some tactical and sometimes strategic differences, but they would play the game. I would think the parts of that, I would argue parts of that still, there's still enough coherence and agreement on certain fundamental parts around this empire that they both agree, and that the Democrats are hoping that they can convince Trump to stick with. So like right now, I want everybody to be clear. They're having some serious conversations around don't leave NATO and keep supporting Ukraine. Now, he's going to probably do what he wants to do anyway, right? To a degree, and do a fight, I think with the brass over the Pentagon. And so that's a fight, a punch point that we need to really, keep out because, they have their own interests. What he means by the deep state and we mean by the deep state ain't the same thing, even though it's some of the same rhetoric. They ain't necessarily the same thing, but it does speak to, their particular interests, being out of alignment there. And he wants to make sure that, he's not going to have no more General Milley's, contravening his orders and operating behind his back. He's going to try to clear the top brass. And they ain't inclined to leave. So there's a point of contradiction and conflict there that it's be hard for most of us to kind of see, but it'll show itself up in different political decisions. So they're going to try to, construct certain compromises. And we got to be mindful that the compromises the Democrats are willing to construct are going to be on our backs, right? And so this goes back to this point of alignment. Now I'm all with, unite everybody, who can be united. But there has to be some terms and conditions because now we're dealing with, I would argue, with the nature of the repressive apparatus. Not just dealing with certain like little tactical invariances. You're talking about either people being wiped off the scene, disappeared, or rounded up and put in prison. These are the terms and conditions that they are, seriously talking about executing. And again, take them seriously for what they say at this particular point in time. And also understand the difference between now and 2016. They had a taste of power. They didn't quite know what they were doing. They didn't have the cadre to execute. I'm talking about the fascists, the neo-Confederates and the fascists. They didn't have, the control over the actual machinery of government to be able to execute. Project 2025, I would argue the dangerous part about it is that they built with that project and with this organizing thing, they've been building a cadre. They've been building a network of folks that they can plug in and play like immediately. That was one of his critical aims. Like, this person is going to be filled this office, and this person and they're going to run and execute these orders, whether they be constitutional or not. That's what I'm saying. Don't listen to what's actually there, and do not believe that there's going to be normal bourgeois rule of any form or fashion, or there's going to be elections. And I'm harping on that to get it in the people's head, because I think that then shapes or should shape what type of preparation we need to do, right? And for us to be very clear about that and why we need to utilize these 2 months, right? Start doing the mutual aid, And that all of these things require organizing, not individual, stuff. You got to do your own part, but you need to be doing this with collectives, which for many people probably listeners, you got to start building collectives, and to wherever you're start with wherever people are concerned about the outcomes, or dismayed or disheartened or depressed, flip that over and encourage them to get in organizing around mutual aid, solidarity, as starting points, and then try to move them towards, I would say number one, kind of the food sovereignty pieces and all it means in that, and let folks know that there may be some massive, disruption to the supply lines, coming down the pipeline, and get ready to deal with that. And then there's the other piece, that we're going to have to deal with, and that is sanctuary, organizing sanctuary. And this is where I was saying earlier, why we need to do some temperature checks around what folks really want to do, both in terms of protest and then the other pieces around sanctuary. And what do I mean, comrades? We know that they're going to be hunting for immigrants. We prepare protecting folks. That's a political choice we need to make. I would hope to.
Callie, you're cutting out there.
I would hope the answer is yes. Let me switch over.
Yeah, try to switch over. Let's see if it's any better.
I think this. Give me just a quick second, y'all.
Yeah, no worries.
It's odd, I've been here this weekend, and this thing has worked great until right now.
Yeah. Strange how that happens.
The hotel thing has worked great until this interview. Yeah, I'm like, okay.
I always think of Daruba's jokes.
No problem.
Whenever, yeah. All right, let's see. So go back a little bit, because where it started to cut out is you may be frozen there for a second. Let me get a second to see if we can get you back. All right, let's see.
All right.
All right, there you are. All right, I think you're back.
Is that any better?
Your audio is clear now, so let's hope that it'll work out. Your picture's starting to clear up a little bit too.
Okay, so I'm gonna just stay on my own little wireless thing.
Hotspot, yeah.
But go ahead, bro.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say the part where you started to cut out there was around once you started talking about the hunting of immigrants, right? And what the decision people need to make around that. So say more about, you cut out there, so I wanted you to make that point that you were making there.
Well, we need to start having some serious conversation about sanctuary. Like a serious conversation. We've been talking about, there's the level of sanctuary cities and stuff that have been built. But we need to have a serious conversation, because now that's going to come with some serious political penalty for doing that. And we need to take it, because the right has been organized around that for a good minute, y'all. Right. One of the key things of how they turn, politically and socially, this whole narrative, they really honed in on immigration, and started sending folks up to New York and some of these other cities. So there's a level of acuteness and there's a level of organization that they have around that of trying to understand what both of the pressure points are, but who are folks in these networks who are going to do that, try to offer some sanctuary. So like the churches and the mosques and synagogues and stuff that have helped the different social organizations, they have a list, and they'll do nothing but continue to add to that list. Now, and I'm just saying that so people know, like, the political reality. I hope our moral positions say that we are going to be engaged in defending people, understanding the political cost, and that we become aligned as a movement on defending folks who are providing sanctuary, and we make this one of our hard lines of demarcation. Now, for those of you who think, well, I don't, why put ourselves at risk for folks who, may not be here? If you don't build these types of institutions and you don't build these muscles now, they won't exist when they start coming for you. I'm trying to make a subtle point here, right, of what skill needs to be built what type of political fortification needs to be built and determination needs to be built, right? And why, you can't just like make certain decisions around, well, let this, let this pawn be taken off the chessboard, because these other pieces are more important. You couldn't be further from the truth, I think, in this situation, because the folks, let me put it this way. The folks who know how to provide sanctuary well are the very folks who are going to wind up being targeted. And in fact, it is us, right? The folks who, quote unquote, have papers, who have citizenship. The vast majority of have not had to live constantly on the run, out of a fear of the border agents or the police or immigration control. But there are millions of people here who do that on a daily basis, who have accumulated a lot of knowledge and information on how you do that. And you best figure out how to be in relationship to learn some fucking skills from them that's going to be needed, for the next rounds of struggle that are going to come. Because there's a lot of accumulated knowledge and political will that exists for folks to have to live under a condition like that. And then, constantly living like that, but then showing up to like try to go to work and do X, Y, and Z. Understand that that's knowledge, skill, and a degree of courage that folks are exhibiting. And there's a lot that we got to learn from that. And being allied with folks who are willing, constantly to kind of put themselves at risk in that regard. So don't just look at this as like some moral kind of thing. Look at it from your own material interest of what type of skills and what type of things are going to be needed, and who are your allies, who should be your allies, right? In a moment like this. And it's not oftentimes the people that you kind of normally suspect to engage in the civil discourse around politics in this empire, right? We got to look more below of folks who are grounding and struggling and scraping by. And how have they done that for those of us who've never had to do that? I mean, I know this because it's the kind of world I come from. So I can tell you there's a lot of knowledge that folks, just don't understand or hidden. And sometimes it's just knowing what type of day to be out and where to be out and where not to be, right? Basic things that you would, when you kind of learn within a certain context, but you find like there's a lot of common sense that a lot of folks, people don't have, around who to talk to, who not to talk to, when to shut the fuck up, where to have certain conversations, where not to have certain conversations, who to have conversations with, who not to have conversations with. There's a lot that collectively we need to get back in the habit and practice to the circumstances are going to necessitate it. So use this time to start building that piece around the sanctuary. Because I would argue the next round of folks that we're going to have to probably at the same time, but the other lowest hanging fruit is coming after trans and queer folks. Like, they're going to do that both, in a repressive dynamics, which you've already seen. And then the other aspect of it is going to try to make, being gay, basically, being queer illegal. And don't think that I'm talking hyperbolic. They've stated they want to do that. They've been working towards that end. Clarence Thomas is already talking about bring me some cases so I can reverse the marriage laws and some of the other laws. He's asking activists for them to do that. So this is a certain part of the strategy, but they're going to try to make it illegal and make everybody have to go back into the closet and be deeply repressed. And we got to make some political decisions. Are we going to protect our people or are we not? And what are the types of things that we need to do to be able to prepare that? The sanctuary and organizing so that folks have the medical kind of supplies and knowledge and expertise they need for different things. That's going to be another critical piece that we're going to need to in terms of healthcare in all of its broad dimensions that we're going to need and start gearing up now and start thinking about now in different ways. I've seen some good advice out tight around folks, just on one case around like getting Plan B pills and other things and what their storage life is. Like, we need to start passing around knowledge like that so folks are cleanly aware and it's kind of like start stocking up now and go back to looking at, like outside the women's clinic that existed up in Chicago, in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Look that up as an example of how a group of collective of women, were providing healthcare services to women underground when that was all illegal. Go back and look at some of these models as examples, because they're going to be needed in the here and now, and what types of discipline, communication, organization was necessary and required, to move these things in such a manner. The people were taking calculated risks, but structured the risks around organizing. And we then, within that, we need to be mindful now that we start learning, in terms of practical things, start learning how to use the lowest tech available for communications. Everybody needs to start going back to old school ways, to the extent that technology is still available. People may sound silly, but AM, FM radios, walkie-talkies, all that stuff, cell phones and all that, we giving away so much knowledge being tracked without our knowledge and consent all the different time. If you want to do something serious, you better jettison some of that, or, just keep it in environments, don't have your phone with you at all times, depending on what you do and what you're trying to do, for instance, or your computer, or anything, that has like a computer chip or some digital apparatus, because that all stuff can be tapped into remotely very easily, by the state. So those are some practical things that we need to learn. But the most critical piece is just getting ourselves organized and doing this next 2 months at a base level, right? And setting these lines of demarcation, so we know who we're dealing with, what are going to be the terms of what we're going to have to organize around. And then we are going to have to, basically create, I think, a coherent set of demands. And I'm not talking about demands to the state. Let me be clear. I'm talking about demands on each other and our capacity and time, first and foremost, around what we are going to do to both fortify our position and then fight back. And I want to be clear what I mean by that. Like, I don't know, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I don't know of a case where fascists get into power and then surrender that by vote. If anybody knows of any example where that has happened, where they've been removed through some quote unquote democratic means, please send it to me, because I want to study it and understand what happened. That's not how these forces wind up going down. And if folks want to cite like Argentina or Spain or something like that, that's not the read. That, those things change primarily because international orders of capital forced them to change, but they were being pressured from below, like in the case of Spain, like the Basque independent movement, the Catalonian movement, trade union movement, like those things were bubbling underground that forced some of that change. So when Franco died, one of the conditions of, that got put on them by the U.S. around the NATO construction and joining the EU, y'all gonna have to at least make some surface, concessions to be able to enter into this common market in this particular way. So that was imposed. It wasn't like, they just decided, oh, we're gonna become, democratic. They may have used that rhetoric, and I'm citing this thing because we need to be clear about what is more than likely going to happen here. And if I'm wrong and we prove to be wrong, then great. The worst that will happen is we more organized. By having this particular orientation and building the type of muscles that we can flex when they are going to be needed, to not just, survive, but to actually win. And I always keep my eyes always like I'm still, even in looking at these blows, focusing on the long-term win, understanding how shaky this whole thing is. It looks mighty and overwhelming, and it is, but the level of will that we need to get to ultimately, if we're looking for living examples, look at the Palestinian resistance. And yes, Gaza has been flattened, but they still fighting. Ask yourself how.
Yeah.
What type of will and resolve, was needed, and preparation, with tunnels and tools and resource. What, think of the back end of this, y'all. Don't just think of just what you see in terms of the devastation. you know, because trust me, they didn't have no illusions about what Israel was going to do. They've been doing it to them all along, right? And so they made a concerted, you know, choice. And yes, it's been, you know, brutal, far beyond I think what any of us thought that Israel would do. But they've told us that this is what they were capable of doing all along, and what the international community, quote unquote, has enabled them to do for decades, at least all the time in my life. And so, you know, folks who don't have no illusions do the things that you see being done, and are still being able to carry out resistance well after a year now, right? They still are not defeated despite all the devastation that you see. And I'm just citing that, right, to be like, you know, what I was going to point I was going to make earlier is like, yeah, we're, you know, talking about doing food production, all this stuff. Understand that, you know, the U.S. government can wipe that out here just as quickly as they wiped it out there. So it's the deeper political resolve and organization that you're going to need in the unity, right? You know, I'm going to go back to my man Cabral. Like, our people ultimately have to be our mountains. The preparation helps. And if nothing else, part of the preparation is, all right, if they come burn us out, I know how to do it. So I can do it again, right? If you burn it out, you know, because I've accumulated the knowledge and the skill to be able to do it, it's the will to be able to, like, okay, I'm gonna move to the next field, or, you know, wait for them to retreat and come back and do it again. Like, that is the level of that we're gonna have to get at, y'all.
Appreciate it. I wanted to follow up on this discussion around like politicizing all of these things in a certain way, because I think that's a really critical point. Like, a lot of times, even with the last conversation we had, you know, and there's a kind of bad faith argument that I hear from folks, but it also it's rooted in something real, I think, that people experience, which is that with a lot of the history in recent years of mutual aid, of you know, community gardens, of these kind of things, like, it's good work that people are doing, but it does tend to be you know, ultimately kind of isolated pockets,
Right.
insufficient, not
Right.
not connected up. And I know that you're advocating something different. You're advocating for all of these things to sort of network up, to do bigger planning together, have bigger political discussions together. But what I'm thinking about too is like that I think even doing that, a lot of people don't really have a good idea of how to do that, of how to um you know, of what that political orientation. I know you're trying to lay out like the nuts and bolts of that political orientation, but I'm wondering if, you know, you will, or others, or if there are networks that you think will be working to kind of share as much in terms of a political articulation or political orientation of what these things need to do. Because I think that a lot of people who are already engaged in these type of work need a kind of roadmap in a certain extent of how to coordinate these things and politicize it towards, you know, I don't know whether it's a party or, you know, a big mass organization or exactly, but like something to where there's a coordinated effort to kind of deliver the messaging. Obviously, you're going to respond to, you know, a lot in terms of what are the local questions, needs, so on within your community. So you have to stay nimble to a certain degree. But yeah, I guess I'm just curious if you and others are thinking about something in terms of organizing a kind of, whether it's a political education series around this or something like that.
Yes. And I'm deeply frustrated by part of what you raised, because I think you were in on part of a conversation where I was trying to get a couple of people of saying, you know, what I wanted to do early in the year was to do a series of basically educational videos that went through the Build and Fight program, literally. You know, we're going to try, Cooperation Jackson going to try to do some of that, just to put that in there, you know, with we've been working with Rosa Clemente. We start working with Tunda Seasway, you know, and some other folks, hopefully doing some stuff with Rick Wolf, but, you know, towards this thing. But I want to go through, just to put it out there, a step by step. This is mutual aid, food sovereignty, right? Worker self-organization, community production, people's assemblies, right? Decision making, self-defense, like go through it as building blocks and go through like a popular education piece. So there's like more kind of a practical step by step by step. And this is how you try to aggregate these particular things and how to make them come together. So I'm really mad at both myself and some others, mad in a good sense, in a loving sense of like, yo, we didn't do it. Right. And we had an opportunity to put that out and we didn't do it. Right. And I think some of it had to do, honestly, I'm going to press my comrades and say that here, I don't think that they thought this outcome was going to happen. So there wasn't an urgency, or at least what I was feeling as an urgency. So I hope we aim to correct that, and I aim to make a contribution, towards that end, definitely. So yeah, just be on the lookout for that. I think there's
Yes.
some pieces that need to come in that vein. But let me put this out here now, right? As an undertow to what you're saying. Let me make explicit part of something I was arguing for, and people may find this weird coming from me, but let me make explicit. We need forces like DSA, M4BL, to back off an element of mobilization around the election, since that's over, and to adopt the core elements that I would call like this build and fight kind of formula, and take the energy and the resources that they have and start focusing in on these concentrated areas, right? In these urban and suburban areas is the first round to start implementing these programs on a mass level with the forces that you have and the resources that you have. And, the first thing is start doing the mutual aid and the sanctuary and the food production pieces as a first piece. And the critical thing is to utilize those forces, number one, that you have or that you can deploy in alliance with other folks. I'm just stating organizations that have massive listservs, tens of thousands of people who are at least on their rolls, the largest formations that we have. There are others I could cite. I'm just citing them, not to call anybody out, but to challenge our folks to what it will take. Because I think there's just like a leap that folks have in their mind, which is not that great, actually, right? Is redirecting some energy and redeploying some of our human resources to actually move in a particular program. And does it require some people to learn how to like garden and farm? Yes, but there's people who already know how to do that. But are they connected to the folks who just spent like 6 months door knocking and canvassing, right? So people who are already out there trying to get folks to vote for Kamala in the main or for whoever, right? PSL or the Greens. People were already out there doing that. All right, so flip that. Can we now do that and say, we want to, build community-supported agriculture programs throughout this entire neighborhood? Are you willing to come and put, an hour or two of work in, doing this farm, or coming to help gather, resources, or have certain kind of expertise, medical skills or something like that, that you could volunteer and coordinate that? We have enough infrastructure. It's just not coordinated. It's just not attuned politically, right? And I know what I'm saying, what I think is controversial, because, most of us or in your audience are definitely more, on the Marxist, anarchist oriented, sides of the equation. And oftentimes we don't want to deal with some of these other forces. Well, guess what? We're going to have to. You're going to have to. So that's why I'm naming them and putting it in there. And I think the argument has to be, we now need to move in this particular direction. Necessity requires us to do that. And I need to redirect some of my time and energy into building a relationship with you. And I need you to redirect some of your time and energy to making a relationship with me. And we're doing this for the point of building this particular program. And we all bring a certain skill set, resources, contact lists, all those different things. How do we now deploy that to build this program, right? And then be clear about what the aims and objectives of this program are, which is the first level of we're trying to build a core element of dual power. And make no mistake about it, we need to be clear and explicit about what that means. And even though there's different interpretations, the first level of it is having enough political autonomy and maneuverability to make our own governing decisions in our own communities outside of the realm of the state, trying to make that as clear and explicit as possible. But I want to argue, particularly with some of my anarchist comrades, we're going to have to confront the state. And that means at a certain point, we're going to have to occupy certain aspects, at least, of what it does or how it functions, and then, dismantle it either from within or the outside, or some combination of both. I think ultimately it's a combination of both. But that is what we're gearing up towards. And why I was making the point, trying to be more implicit, but making the point of, if we really don't think that there's going to be another election, right? That gives us should give us some space to start thinking about, well, what type of society do we want to live in? Not just think about, well, if this argument around joining the liberals around restoring the bourgeois order, I ain't got no interest in it. I'm just put that out very clearly, none, right? Because it's not like it produced the outcome it produced for a particular reason, right? That wasn't by accident or happenstance. Like that's pretty much kind of a premeditated outcome, determined structurally. So there's an element of what we have to do in terms of start to revision in the society, which is like, I'm not trying to repeat the Constitution or the constitutional order myself. I'm trying to overturn that, or move that out the way, and construct something that is genuinely democratic on its own, that we construct from the bottom up to participatory means. That's a different orientation, one that we're going to have to make a political argumentation for, and why I'm saying this line of demarcation is particularly acute. It's not a line of demarcation, but be like, I don't want to F with you in a particular way. It's a line of demarcation, like, no, we need to be clear about, what are the terms of compromise that you might be willing to make that will undermine a broader project of social transformation. So if you just doing this to get back to voting every 2 years, but that vote still enables, NATO, or still enables a genocide, I ain't with that. I ain't got no time for that. You might as well go side with the fascists, because that's what you are ultimately enabling. But we need to be clear, not in terms of, trying to think and understanding ourselves as being in the minority, but we need to start within a clear understanding that right now, comrades, we are in an extreme minority, right? It would be foolish to not think otherwise, right? And so that then means, like, well, what level of the small forces that we have, how do we get better? That's why I was going on about the political will so much, just to make that more explicit. Why we need to do that, because then we're not trying to be in isolation. We're trying to move with the level of political clarity in our dialogue with folks, to be like, I need you to see reality for what it is, in a particular way, around how this system no longer functions or work, and what we need to do to create a new one. And I'm having these conversations with like liberal people, because this thing is not going to continue to function in a particular way. So you need to start envisioning with me and with others something different. Are you willing to do that? Right? And they may not be willing to do it immediately. We all got certain things that we believe despite the facts, and we hold on to, right? And so, I'm not saying, to just be, cold-hearted is not going to get us. Somebody might not be ready for it to hear a particular point now. You might have to come back to them 6 months from now as conditions reveal themselves, even though it would be, if we did certain things 6 months earlier, like I was just talking about the example of this education program, I think we would be further along. But here we are. So we got to deal with the conditions as they are, and then try to change them in that particular way. But, what I'm trying to say, Jared, is that, look, it's not as far-fetched, for us to move. I'm not saying it won't be challenging and won't be difficult, because folks have their political orientations and their programs for a reason, right, in terms of what they believe. But we're going to have to be involved with these different layers of being like, look, we need to do something different with the capacity that we have, right? And it needs to move in some particular ways, and we need y'all to get down with this broad program, right? In its particular articulation, help us build that and utilize your skills and resources and context, so we're not just doing this in isolation, but you can start moving the folks on your tree list, which includes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people when you aggregate all it up. Get them involved in doing this and supporting it with their resources, money, time, effort, so that we move from a community garden, type project to a communal garden piece where it's not just 10 or 20 people doing something, but we might have 1,000 people or 10,000 people in a place like Jackson who are now involved in being in some level of dialogue about who's producing the potatoes, who's producing the tomatoes, how we going to distribute that on a neighborhood level basis. And this is why internationalism is so important. I'm not citing stuff that is beyond the realm of practice of what people on the planet are doing right now. I just did a whole series around the Sudan that hadn't got greatly watched, but I would encourage folks to go watch. The revolution that just took place there, 2019, 2020, which to some elements is still ongoing. Everything I'm telling you around how people were organizing in the people's self-defense committees, right, during that period of time, there's living examples. There's people that you can talk to who are here, or you can get on a call like that and have conversations. How did y'all do that in your neighborhood? Fighting a military dictatorship. How did you defeat that? Right? What did it take? How did y'all seize the moment? Right? So don't think of what I'm trying to just home in. What I'm saying is not beyond it's not fantasy land. It's not conjecture. Like, people are doing this, and in countries all over the third world have had to do this time and time again because of the nature of what imperialism forced upon people. So we can do this. That's the core point. We can do this, and we're gonna have to if we want to get out of the bind that we in.
I appreciate all of that, and I mean, I agree, I think, with a lot of what you're saying. In particular, I think if this lasts 13 months and our inability to, stop a genocide as folks that are, see ourselves, want to be in solidarity with Palestinians, doesn't show folks kind of isn't a gut check in terms of like where we're at in terms of our level of organization, the inability to stop arms manufacturing or the ports or things like this. We got a long way to go, right? And so to see that, and then to know also that there's a mandate for Trump coming in now. There's a whole agenda. It's going to be more well organized. They've already been quite clear on who their domestic enemies are as well as their international ones. I think that we do have to figure out ways that we are going to come together on some kind of principled basis, and recognize that we are smaller than we want to be, and figure out a kind of how do we build a growing posture out of that point of weakness into a point of strength. And I guess one of the questions that I would have is related to, Palestine and to Gaza. And I mean, you mentioned how important that is as a point of solidarity, a point of reference, and a point of kind of a line of demarcation too, to some extent, or maybe just a line of demarcation. And I know that's tricky right now, right? Because a lot of people, I just had a conversation yesterday, and the person we were talking to was talking about how, their feeling was we should appeal to non-voters because those people didn't vote for either Harris or Trump. And I think I understand the logic there, but I also fear that some of us, myself included, can fall into this position of kind of feeling morally superior to people who went out and voted for somebody that we think of as a genocidaire, whether that's Harris or whether we think that's Trump. And with your, so I guess what I'm saying is how do we bridge that gap, or how do we have those conversations in a principled way and set some kind of line of demarcation around that, but not shut people off, because we're going to need people that are coming from different places to this moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, number one, we got to get rid of this moral superiority high and the left got to take away some of its blindness, and be real with itself, because Palestine is in the news and is getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. But we didn't make Haiti a line of demarcation in the sand. We didn't make the Sudan a line of demarcation in the sand, right? And I can go on. Like, there's a whole bunch of struggles out there, ongoing colonial occupations, trying to get in contact and do a show with folks in, West Papua New Guinea. Most folks don't know nothing about that struggle, right? Or some of the stuff that's been popping off in, Caledonia, or some of the stuff that's just recently, to try to make up for losing control, over the Sahel. Macron went and sold out Polisario and the Sahrawi people by acknowledging, the claims of the Moroccan monarchy, to that territory. That was just a couple of weeks ago, right? All these things are happening on our watch, where the political apparatus, because we don't know, we're not paying attention, we still enabling shit to happen, that is just as consequential as that. In some respects, the numbers are even worse in terms of like displacement. So we've got, if we're gonna be international, we're gonna be internationalists and not selective internationalists. So that moral piece is like, nah, that's wrong on our end, right? For things that, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that I don't know, that around struggles that I got to be educated upon. So it's like what my position is relative to the commitment to the international, revolution. And then I just have to be awakened to make better choices, by comrades who are involved in those particular struggles, to be like, nah, you need to, be opposed to this. This is what's going on in the Philippines, and your choice, if y'all not fighting against the U.S., military, this is what it looks like on the ground for me. That's everywhere, because we live in an empire. The primary empire, the primary contradiction we hear. And so, we have an obligation to try to figure all this out and be in solidarity. And that's harder than it sounds, because it requires a lot of studying and being open and willing to engage folks and to learn. But this, my point being here that we got blind spots. And so just because somebody, voted for Harris, I think we need, like, I know folks in my own family, who solid, have been solid, taught me about Palestine. They voted for Harris on a tactical reason. They're going to be out there on the streets and protesting and stuff, for Palestine. So, I'm like, I disagree with you. I didn't vote for, wouldn't have voted for, right? But I'm not going to make that a line of that particular piece, be kind of a line of demarcation as to why I won't work with you under the new terms and circumstances. We do have to make a distinction between those who did that kind of on a tactical level, as opposed to those who are committed to the Democratic Party apparatus. That's a different thing, right? And the piece I'm talking about, they ain't committed to the Democratic apparatus. At best, they like, I got Pepsi and choice to choose from. I chose Pepsi, but I don't own the factory that does X, Y, and Z to make other choices. So this is what's available to me. I try to play the field the best I could relative to my own interests. We I kind of act with I dare say a level of both compassion and sophistication around, like, all right, well, that's what you did. I disagree with it, comrade, but now we need to move forward in this way. And what I ask you going forward is, drop your allegiance to those forces, right? Like, I understand you, at best, you try to be, you thought being in a temporary kind of alliance, a tactical alliance with these neoliberal forces, might create more democratic room and space, so we need to engage that argument. I was arguing, I know Angela put out something like they would enable more space. I was countering, no, it doesn't. You're not looking at, what they did in Cop City or what they're doing, in setting those things up, mainly under democratic, regime. So it was going to be a fight either way. But you do have to, like, we also can't, we having this conversation because Trump got elected. We'd have a different conversation if Kamala got elected. Still be one about repression, but it would be one about how do you fight the selective repression rather than the generalized? Because that's the difference between them, right? Like, they sacrifice folks. The Democrats sacrifice folks all the time. she came out with a program basically saying, if it's going to help me get elected, I'm going to adopt the rights program around immigration. So we were already going to have to fight something like that because that's what they were willing to concede to win, right? They're going to continue to make it. So I think our argument with Congress is like, okay, you can't continue to keep getting down with these forces who are willing to make these type of compromise. We got to build an alternative, and are you willing to do that? That's a different conversation, right? And it's a different posture than be like, I'm upset with you that you did that I'm just not going to have any level of conversation with you, even though you did that on a tactical level. Let that be what it is, and let's figure out how to go forward. And then that's, make some conditionalities. Be like, hopefully this proves to you, why working with these forces don't work. And then I think there's another conversation that you brought up, something which I argue with folks like, about, me supporting at various points in time third parties, right? And I've been saying that we need to come up with something. People be like, well, you detracted from the Democrat. No, I'm not. Because the reality is it's always been the task of folks like us to try to organize the majority of people who don't vote in this country. And that's the consistent actual majority, right? And if you look at it, there's less people, something like 16 million less people voted this election on the presidential election than voted in 2020. That should tell you something. With all of the media and hype that more and more people got convinced, man, they're going to do it. These two forces are going to do what they want to do regardless anyway. So what difference do it make? So we can let that be kind of in an apathetic space, so we can actually build an alternative that will attract them to do something different. I argue, let's build a damn alternative. That's been my argument. Will continue to be my argument. Hopefully now there's enough clarity around why you need that and why you can't, rely on fair weather friends at best within the Democratic Party kind of alignment to move the needle. And that's why I'm saying this. We got to look at this more as an opportunity to win over some of the forces who are disillusioned with that, who now learn some lessons from relating to that party and apparatus, right? That's not going to be the majority. Let's be clear, right? That's not going to be the majority immediately, but there's going to be a significant amount of people, I think, to work with and try to move and persuade. But to use this as the case, our primary base has been those folks who are so disaffected and don't believe Pepsi or Coke makes that much of a difference. Like, that's who we need to try to figure out how to tap into and organize, because that's who's wanting the alternative, but just kind of scraping by and struggling on the grind, because they're very clear. I think they've been operating like, don't make a difference which one is in power. My hood looked the same under Obama as it looked under Trump, as it looked under Biden, as it's going to look under Trump again. It's that fundamentally ain't going to change. So what does need to change? And that's where, like, organizing the working class in its broad multinational, complexity and diversity, like, that's our task, and we're gonna have to figure out how to do that. And what I'm speaking to, to make it more concrete, we do need to have a conversation, like I'll put it like the DSA about with a dirty break or whatever they call it. Be like, all right, y'all already have a real conversation now, right? Because clearly that didn't work. They didn't give y'all no play, no juice, wouldn't put a Palestinian on the stage, wouldn't give no real working class representation in any of their platform or program. So y'all ready to do something different now? And these are the different things that we need y'all to do, to come down and be involved with, and pick this up. And there's going to be a constant struggle, I think, with them, to not dilute the program or to try to surrender it over to the Democrats, and that's my issue. Is they were like the Working Families Party. Like, I see y'all adopted some elements of like the build and fight, formula, and that's cool. But like, are you adopting it to turn it over, to this Democratic Party apparatus? That I'm not cool with. That I'm gonna struggle with, right? Because it needs to stand on its own and has build its own autonomy to build and maximize political power, and not just try to build up a level of base that you then surrender over, to that element of the bourgeoisie to parlay and negotiate with. No, that's not what we should be doing. And that means it may be a longer, a road, to try to transform society. But I'd rather struggle to transform society than just settle with and having access to power. Access to power is not having power, right? Being at the table, where decisions are being, made. My folks, were enslaved. We were in the master's house. We weren't making no decisions. Keep that in mind as an analogy. Some of my folks heard the decisions that was made, or there was maids and services, but they weren't. So access is not the same as actually having power. We need power, not access to it. So that has to be a kind of a line of demarcation, a point of clarity with folks that I think we need to articulate. We are about building power, and there are no shortcuts to a certain degree of doing that. Allying yourself with one particular faction of capital or with their political representatives within the Democratic Party. That's not how we're going to get there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that and agree. As someone who worked in nonprofit administration for a number of years and was in all the meetings, but didn't have didn't have any power in the meetings,
Right.
that was for sure. All right. So how does the program you're describing today for local organizing interact or overlap with what Dhoruba Ben Wahad has been advocating around a united front against fascism, which he is, he had a good conversation the other day. Folks should check it out if they didn't see it on Black Power Media or Black Liberation Media, my fault, with Jared Ball. But yeah, I mean, how are there?
I haven't listened to it, but so
yeah.
I couldn't speak to the.
I mean,
I'm sure there's a lot of alignment. I would say that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah. A lot of it, as I understand it, right, is building an independent political force, bringing together people on broad lines of unity, having people's assemblies. One of his things is always about bringing together like abolitionists and thinking about like the cop cities that are coming around, and also organizing for community control of police and things like this. And so that's a very broad and probably overly simplistic discussion of what he's talking about, but obviously it draws its its historical basis from the United Front Against Fascism that the Panthers were doing at the I guess around 1970 or 1969, in that era. So yeah, that's another. I think that's one of the questions too, of like, there's going to be different prescriptions that are going to be put out, or different potential programs. Like, how do we, what do you think in terms of like trying to? That's one of my, I guess, concerns with the left these days in terms of, and I'm not saying this with regard to Dhoruba, because Dhoruba is actually advocating something that is trying to bring folks together, and I know you are as well. But part of my concern is that everybody comes up with their own prescription, the kind of level of sectarianism that we've experienced over the last, 10 years or so, maybe much longer. And people don't come together, right? And because they kind of take their own approach of, we're going to lead on this particular agenda and you can get down with it, or you can get down with somebody else's. And I think that's going to be a losing formula, as it has been.
I was going to say it is a losing formula, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in. I mean, the my way or the highway ain't gonna work. So we're gonna have to come together and in a way that we have meant it around principle struggle this go round. So, what I can say, I know without listening to it and what you described, is pretty much what I would imagine Dhoruba would say. I have to listen for the nuance. That's because we come from the same political family, the same political tree, so there may be some variance here or there, but most of the prescription, I think, is going to be the same. Now, I think the all I'm trying to argue for, that I say would be a little point of variance, is like these kind of lines of demarcation. Like, I would maybe say, to be clear with all the folks here, I would emphasize that, and I'm emphasizing that for reasons drawn from my own experience trying to execute this in Jackson, and having to work in a particular environment where folks were not willing to go the full length and try to make certain compromises to have access. So I'm giving a prescription based upon a practice and a history, not just a theory, and that may be different in other people's contexts, right? You may not have the same forces or the same exact contradictions. There's the same dynamics, because we live under the same general dynamics of, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy. So there's going to be more overlap than there will be variance. But some of the things of how this plays out may vary from place to place. But the piece around the being involved in principal struggle, like, are we going to be able during this period to speak our differences? I would ask people to come up with analysis. I believe put your best ideas forward, put them forward to be debated, accept that they're going to be subjected to scrutiny, learn from the scrutiny, because that's, old steel sharpens steel at the end of the day. So, people coming up with, what about this? So I don't think, like, if we truly are listening and doing so in the spirit of, I'm offering you because I want to win, and I don't know if this is going to enable us to, but I want to be in practice with you. So that's the difference. I think, around, like, how to overcome the sectarianism. Like, I'm not trying to win an argument to win no argument. I'm trying to change reality. And if that means at a certain point, compromising, quote unquote, with, like, comrades because they want to emphasize, doing the self-defense before, doing the food sovereignty stuff. Are we in motion? Are we going to actually do it? Then I maybe can roll with that. I'm gonna still argue, like, we got to eat, but, and try to, do some things. But if that's what the majority say and the People's Assembly want to come up, we give our part, then let's roll with that, because I'm like with Marx, that real motion is what's important at the end of the day, right? Even if my analysis is right, if there's real motion and there's people organized and we got structure, we can then make a course correction, right? But if we're not organized, if we're not together, then it's just an individual argument, and there won't be any ability to make a course correction. So yeah, it's like our practice around what we are articulated to do and why. And it's one thing to make compromises with allied forces heading in the same direction, following the same principles and to a degree the same program. Like, those are just wind up being tactical differences. Allow that to happen, right? But when there's other particular thing, like, you got to unite with me, and unite with me means throwing the Palestinians under. No, I can't. I'm not gonna get with that. That's the line of demarcation. I'm not crossing that, right? So that's why being clear, but if what we need to do, I think the challenge, and I'm gonna take this on because I know Jared and folks. I don't have a deep relationship with Deruba, but that's a quick second away. We need to start getting together, and forces like that, and folks in this argument. The local work is more important. It's most important in terms of your mature reality, right? I want to just, like, me and Jerubal agreeing don't mean nothing if there's nobody practicing what we're talking about on the ground, including ourselves. So, that the local orientation is the most important thing, and you're gonna have to, folks listen to this who agree with elements either in whole or part of what I'm saying. The challenge is going to be to you in your local communities to, like, put this in practice, and you're gonna have to work with the forces that are there, and you're gonna have to figure out how to both convince people of certain arguments and move them and work with them, but also being in certain places where, is this worth breaking over and not engaging with people over? You're gonna have to make that decision. Hopefully, make the decision that puts something real in motion, that addresses the programmatic need, and then get organized, get the fundamental principle of, getting the organization off the ground. Then you can make adjustments as things, go along, and people make collective assessments with each other. We were right here. We were wrong here. We de-emphasize this. We need to do X, Y, and Z. Then you can make that, enable that to happen, right? But the first thing is to start being in dialogue with folks to put a program in place, organize people. That's the most important thing in what we got to do this next 2 months as a starting place. That's what I would argue for.
I absolutely appreciate that and agree. Let's see. So Tony asked, do you have recommendations, books, or articles on mutual aid? No, Tony knows of Dean Spade's work, which is great,
That's a
but
good
any
book.
others
Yeah.
to add? Yeah, like are there other things that I mean, I know you're never here to plug your book, but the second edition of the Jackson Rising that's out on PM Press does have a lot of articles that lay out the different experiments that you've done, the different work that you all have done in Jackson to try to implement different things around a lot of the programs that you think about, you've been a part of. And I do recommend that as another source for people to look to for inspiration around some of these things for sure.
Spades is the best piece that's out there now that's accessible. So I would definitely recommend that. There's a couple of things that are out there. I mean, going back to the old Kropotkin stuff is still good. I would then look at some stuff from a historical perspective on from Barcelona and Spain, like during the Civil War, is good stuff there. And I would encourage the Marxists who like, oh, that's come from the anarchist tradition, read it, read the damn shit, learn from it, take the ideological blinders off, recognize what people were able and capable of doing at that particular point in time. Yes, it had weaknesses and shortcomings. Everything we do does, but learn. There's some good works that come out of that tradition in that particular period that speak to some of this. What else in terms of mutual aid? There's some good like beginners books and stuff out there, that I could kind of make a list of off the top of my head. That's the best book I've read, and we utilize that book in some of our work around mutual aid. And I'm speaking specifically of the Spade book.
Yeah. So folks asked what it was. It's just called Mutual Aid. And it's a short book. It is very accessible. It's good for reading collectively and studying with folks and thinking about. So Robin asked, how do we overcome or negotiate with folks who are on the fence or disillusioned liberals who feel organizing is too hard or unrealistic?
Keep them, I would say, in practical terms. Keep it. I'm gonna use the old analogy. Keep them in your Rolodex, and keep calling them up. Keep sending them information. Keep inviting them to certain meetings, and allow for conditions to move them in a particular way. But the important point, I think, is just keep the human connection and the dialogue going, whether they show up or not in this particular point in time. Because a lot of folks are just feeling, I think, just immobilized in their disillusionment. I'm seeing and hearing that a while. And if we just kind of not continue to reach out, then we're helping to enable that. So we got to just keep reaching out. I mean, I don't think we got a choice. That's going to be a critical piece, so there's an element of this we have to approach as just care work in this next period of acknowledging that there are a lot of folks who are scared as shit, don't know what to do, and right now are just looking for some community, some folks to hold them emotionally and in other ways, enable that to happen. That's real, and try to encourage people. I think the challenge is don't let them stay there. You can't necessarily force people, but just keep encouraging. Hey, come do this with me. Come to this event. Come do X, Y, and Z, and and maybe start with the things that are not as risk adjacent off the top, right? So like one of the things around something like the food, kind of work. At its best, don't take it to be just hippie stuff. I've seen it in our work around how folks get better grounded and over a period of time from doing like gardening and farming and feel more connected. Allow that stuff to happen, you know, because if people feel more secure, then they may be more willing to take on, you know, engaging in more direct action and you know, constructing safe houses and being part of security networks and apparatus and communication chains and links, you know, and be willing to take on, you know, more risk, right? And so, you know, there's kind of like two speeds that we got to work with. You got to run fast with those who are ready to run, but also, you know, keep the relay hand open to be able to pass some stuff on to folks who, you know, kind of like trotting along or taking their own speed and not just leaving them, you know, behind or ignoring them. I think that's going to be the critical piece that we're going to have to pick up. Now, in regards to the liberals, that's a more challenging one. I would say, you know, number one, like I was hoping, and I got halfway through writing something that was going to try to encourage the Greens and PSL and Molina and Cornell to like call for a broad unity after this election. Then I heard some of the back and forth acrimony that folks are having. I was like, well, that's going to be too subjective, you know, to put out and let it go. I still think something like that needs to happen. But I'm just citing that up because I don't want folks to get trapped in a conversation the next couple of months that I see already happening. It's a lot of folks, oh, we need to create a third party or a new alternative. And these are folks within the Democratic Party camp. Don't get sucked into them, you know, because 6 months from now, they're going to be right back. Most of them, 90% of them are going to be right back in the fold with the Democrats. You know, this is the licking wounds from you know, losing a 12-round fight that they trying to make some assessments of what they did wrong. And ultimately, you know, they don't come up with every answer but the answer that which is the most obvious one, and just buckle down on trying to refortify that party and that apparatus, you know, by even going further to the right, because that's where they headed, you know. And folks just need to be clear, whatever happens to the apparatus, they're just going to head further to the right.
Yeah, I mean, the lessons that they seem to be taking from this election was we need to stop appealing to the left at all. And it's like, I must have missed when you appealed to the left during this election. I guess I missed that.
Well, you know, what the woman on CNN say, I forget who it was exactly. She was like, you know, stop asking people for their pronouns, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. I was like, well, that's why y'all lost?
Yeah.
Like, really? That's your assessment? You know, so yeah, I'm just saying to our forces, don't, and why I was trying to put out this timeline, don't get sucked up into distractions, conversations about what the Dems are going to do or not going to do. Focus in on what we need to do, right? And to the extent that they want to be in dialogue, again, I'm going to come back to the points of the lines of demarcation ain't like, you know, this or that. I wouldn't present it that way, but just be very, very, very clear what some of these liberals are that people might be involved in, and ask them to do a real assessment, like how, you know, like, so the you want to blame us, you know, the left, for costing you this election. Don't you think that let's say that the 15 million votes that y'all got less, let's say that was the left. So you were stupid to not appeal to us then. That's on you. Right? You know, turning us off is not going to help. I'm not trying to give the Democrats no pointers. So, but I'm just saying how you defeat these arguments around them, or engaging people who want to engage you in certain arguments about moving further to the right. Like, that's not really going to help you, because the right can do that better than you can. Right? And we'll do it ultimately better than you can. And the politics of it, let's be clear. The politics of it is like, if throwing me under the bus is the condition of your victory, then I'm gonna have to fight you anyway. And that's what the articulation of what you're putting out there is throwing us and millions of people like me further under the bus. So you're already gearing up for a fight. Just make the fight clear. If that's what you want to do, then let's be clear about what the terms are. So I'm not walking with any illusions, and nor are you. And so I think that's the particular piece, and why I'm saying, we need to be very clear with our demands at the demarcation. And what I mean by demands, like these are things of ourselves that we being clear on our folks who want to ally. Like, one condition, like, we all gonna try to get there, or we ain't. That's. So are you with everybody trying to get there? That could be one point line to demarcate. And there's contradictions and complications and rights that are in conflict within that framework, of course. But if we engage in a broad, real democratic practice, those will be mediated not by you having more power than me, but they'll be mediated through a democratic process. And that's what we got to, struggle with folks about.
One of the, I have one more question I wanted to ask, and then I don't know how you are on time. Do you need to get going?
I got about 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so so a couple of people brought up, that California just rejected this proposal, which was to make, it was basically to amend their state constitution to make all forms of slavery illegal, including prison slavery, right? And this lost, right? A majority of people said no, like we're fine with prison slavery. We don't want to vote against this. They actually voted to keep that the same. And I have friends and comrades in California who their assessment of that proposal was, look, it's not really going to change things for actual prisoners. It's more kind of, because whether we call it slavery or whether we call it forced labor or we call it this or that, like, and also in California, currently, they're not set up in such a way that like most of the prisons are like industrial, plants for, most prisoners would actually like a job, right, in that scenario, because it gets them out of their cell, it gives them some wiggle room, maybe they can get a little bit of money. So there's that dynamic. But I think the point that we were talking about, my friend and I, about it afterwards is like, what does it mean though that a majority of people actually voted for this to stay the same? Like, that's not coming from some political analysis of this is not going to make change. That's a deeply kind of carceral position, right? And the that was paired, of course, with a even higher majority of people who voted to like further criminalize, I think, thefts and also like maybe drug crimes and things like this. So there's this, and I think this speaks to a much broader trend across the country, which is also the Democratic Party increasingly post George Floyd really leaning into a politics of further criminalization. You compare that with the politics, the border politics and the kind of ICE politics that the Democrats have also leaned into, which are, as you said, really the rights agenda on these things. And so I guess what I'm saying is, how do you feel about the reality that there are majorities of people, even in blue states, who are voting for these things right now, which includes liberals, obviously, and the kind of climate that means that we're operating in terms of, both carcerality and issues like immigration?
You want my honest answer?
Yeah.
You live in a Christian country. And what do I mean by that? The deep reference to the Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition of, which I come out of, is rooted in a dynamic and a logic around reward and benefit, right? And the other side of that is punishment, right? And if you don't do certain things, you're going to be, at least the Christian and Islamic version, you're going to be damned to hell. And that certain people, are deserving to be punished and go to hell, for breaking the commandments and the license and the word of God. That this mentality is a deep structural component of this society. And there are ways in which even the left have adopted core elements of this old moralistic framework. I mean, what we call most of, Marxism still, its root still comes out of a Western framework. Don't think it doesn't. So it has some embedded limitations within it that many people have worked to overcome. And, there's a broad corpus of folks who try to, universalize it in various ways, from, I'm not going to cite people, but, many I could cite. But the abolitionist argument, I don't think we recognize how, out there it is and why certain elements, like even Marxists, sometimes have problems with it. And it's because it's tied, to a deeper, if you want to call it, civilizational framework that this society is kind of, founded on, which structured the laws around, even the logic around capitalism is structured in many respects around some of this rewards and benefits and punishments. In part, I would argue, is where we got this false notion of this argument of Faraday's, wage, Faraday's compensation, whatever it is, I can't remember. Faraday's wage for a fair day's work, whatever the situation is. Like, no, that excludes the logic of exploitation and justifies the system. Actually, a bad, parody, but it makes sense within this concept of a deeper narrative around reward, benefit, and punishment, right? So I wasn't too that surprised, especially when you count in. See, look, one of the things we talked about it here some time ago. I don't think folks took seriously how jarred this society was by the George Floyd rebellion. I don't think people really understood how much that shook up white America and like the Christian elements of this society, of all races. I don't think people really understood that. And so when the Republicans get up, and we're getting up the last 4 years saying, in their mind, January 6th, 2021 was the equivalent of what they saw in Portland and what they saw in Seattle and what they saw in Atlanta, with what they saw in the Twin Cities. They, for them, and that was a psychic shock of a particular era, of a particular order, and it elicited immediate response, right? And so we got to remember, it's been under Democratic administrations primarily that cop cities have emerged. And that was a response to the George Floyd rebellion from the liberals. So I wouldn't, I was not shocked in the sense of both sides of that equation reverted towards a punishment narrative. Biden did it immediately. After him and the Democrats absorbed all that motion into the election around 2020, and then his first, address to the nation as president, we're gonna fund the cops more. We're not doing funding less. We need more. He got on to start arguing for more repression immediately, and totally just said, all you young people who we corralled to vote for us on promise and change, and who wanted to see less of the carceral state, we ain't going in that direction. We going in the opposite direction. We're gonna give them more money, more guns, more weapons. And that was their own response. Now, they didn't verbalize it and articulate it in the same way of a deep fear, around, what the black masses may do, because that's in part of what that whole shit evoked, even though that was multiracial in a way that we've never had it, but it still evoked like this old, I'm gonna call on Gerald Horne and his works, right? The deep fear that exists in so much of, kind of the psyche of white supremacy within this country, right? And I didn't say white people. I said the white supremacy, because there's a whole bunch of black folks was like, oh, and Latinos shook while this is against law and order, and we just revert into lawlessness. People have a fear of that, right? And so oftentimes I think I'm saying is because sometimes we speak about revolution, people want the outcome that we are describing. They do. They don't want the process. And their fear of the process of getting there, right? And this is one of the reasons why classical fascism of the mid 20th century, why it was so successful of appropriating so much of the left's arguments and positionality, right? Because it promised new outcomes, but with order, as opposed to new outcomes mediated through a period of chaos. And that appealed to large sectors of the working class then. It clearly just appealed to the large sectors of the working class now. We better learn that lesson and understand there is some narrative work that we have to do. That part, what the liberals are out there talking, I don't mean it in the same way they do, but there is a truth around how we need to construct our arguments and go about the business of revolution. Right, and I think sometimes our own, at least some of the traditions I come out of, which at times did glorify the gun and other stuff like that, and even in the black community, that some of us was like, I was wondering, I was some of, particularly, some of the older women, I'm not with that, nope, and wouldn't necessarily say anything to like our face, but if they were then given a choice and option, like, can go? Would you vote for this? Hell no. I'm not. I don't know what the hell the men with guns would ultimately do. I'm scared of the men with guns. Right? That's not how I see change, because that could easily turn into repression. I'm not sure. I want that from some force that I don't view as legitimate in at this particular point in time, and we got to deal with that. Like. I would argue that it is oftentimes our alignment with liberals and the betrayals that come down, it weakens our legitimacy, right? Because we don't stand on our own and then have to prove our own arguments on our own terms and our own merits and earn people's trust, right? But if we constantly allied to somebody else's wagon, and we have to answer for their mistakes or their compromises, and them, selling folks out, and going back to this whole argument, why the Kamala couldn't make no rational economic argument, because it just speaks against what folks know. So if you I think it was something like almost the people in trade unions, about 50% of them I saw, I remember the exact number, voted for Trump, even though the union bosses all said to go a particular way. You know why? In part, not the so folks remember NAFTA, folks remember CAFTA, and they did that. Democrats did that. They were the one who structured those deals. They were the one who dismantled the factories, here and there, or allow them to go, to Mississippi and Alabama where there's no right to work wage, or go overseas. They did that. So you want me to trust these people again? And even though it's a total lie that some major manufacturing stuff is going to come back to the United States. Not that manufacturing is not going to come back to the United States. Let me be clear. It is going to come back. It is coming back. It's just going to be automated. It ain't going to be nobody working in it. But the elements of it is going to come back. But they ain't going to pay American workers no serious competitive wage. They're going to automate that, which is one of the key reasons why Bezos and Elon Musk and them lined up with Trump. They knew where their interests lie, at the end of the day. And if they can get big tech to totally capture the state, and particularly in this race with AI, they would have totally occupied the center of government, and then could even move the fascists out the way. And so that part I agree with Yanis Varoufakis on, and what I've been, trying to make a loose argument about for years, about the role of big tech and the role of big data as being overcoming and displacing the dominance of finance capital, just finance capital on its own merit, like the bankers, like big tech is displacing that. And you clearly, like, they're making some serious moves that we got to, seriously understand and figure out how to fight. But just going back to that question, like, there's deeper components around, the logic of this society that we got to understand, and then we need to. I'm not saying that we don't make abolitionist arguments. The folks heard that. I'm not saying that at all. I think we just have to recognize in making these arguments how we're going to have to win the narrative, because it is right, but it's so foreign to how, the last 2,000 years of common historical reference that we have, which comes from Europe, let's be clear, that common reference that structures the United States around this Judeo-Christian framework is structured on some deep premises of punishment that are not easily overcome, and that our arguments are stepping out of the fold. They're not within that square of how you reconfigure an answer to reform it. It's something outside of that, and we're gonna have to win that argument, right? And that's gonna take some deep work to do. But we need to be here for it.
Appreciate that so much. I want to say a couple things as we close out. One, to the extent that you want to have multiple conversations on this, our platform's always open to you. And also beyond that, it doesn't just have to be ours. I mean, we will cross promote other stuff if you're having conversations with other, media folks in some kind of series or anything like that. We would be happy to also model the kind of coming together and mutual support that we need to be embodying in the movement right now. So just wanted to say that to you publicly and for everybody else to hear as well. And yeah, I mean, I hope that we can do a part 2. I know that there's more things that people would be interested in.
No, let's do it. Let's
into.
definitely do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say publicly, I'm here for it. I hope this was helpful. Said to the audience, there's some things that I'm gonna continue to try to speak in code, but I hope you go, look at the implications of it. But I do want to try to do more of a step-by-step in terms of answering the practical questions that I think you put out there and others put out there. I appreciate y'all asking. We need to get to the practical pieces. There are some things I do have, me and others that I know have some practical things that we need to share. We need to open the platform. I'm committed to doing that. So we will be back. And I want to try to break things down to just like, and you accept it or reject it, but to try to just break it down, because we at the stage where it's, we got to make it practical and put it in so we can put it into practice and figure out, like, how to start, where to start. And I'm gonna just provide what I know from my example. There are other people with experiences, some which far exceeds mine in different areas. I'm gonna encourage them to come on and be a part of this, because let's be here to win. That's the critical piece. And we at the point where the rubber hits the road. I'm looking forward for this. I know this is going to be some serious, times of trepidation. They will be hunting forces like us. Let's be clear about that. But it's only unity that's going to break it. So let's do it. I'm down. Let's figure out the time.
100%. All right. Thank you so much for this, Kali. And thanks for everybody for coming through and checking it out and asking questions. And we'll continue. All right. Peace, man. Thank you.
All right, bro.